All right, we're going to talk about the History API. Now this is part 2 of the videos about the History API. So if you haven't seen the first one, please follow the link that's down inside the comments to watch the first part and get the basics of the individual objects that we're going to be able to use. So I want to talk now about controlling navigation. Whether you're building a website or you're building a single page application, a mobile web app, whatever it is that you're building, there are ways that we can control the navigation and control what happens on the page based on what the URL is, based on what the user's clicking. So jumping back into our code here, I have a DOM content loaded event listener here, and this is where I'm going to be doing my initial setup. So after the DOM has been read and processed, this script is going to run here, and this is going to get the whole thing started. I have one function inside of here which is really just to display messages on the screen. If I call the function show in my code, it's just going to write the message out, and then after 4 seconds it's going to remove itself from the screen. So I added that function in just for better functionality on the web page instead of writing things out to the console. Alright, now, two main methods here. Push state and replace state. This is for managing that history array that the browser maintains. If I call replace state, I'm saying replace the current entry in the history array with some new value. Now, the first part is an object. This is the history state property. So I can create anything that I would in JSON. Create a property called ABC, give it the value 1, 2, 3, or anything at all that you want. So if you want to maintain settings, okay, the last item that the user looked at on my website was this, or the last person to log in was this, the high score in the game was this. This is the history state object, and this is where we would save that information. A second parameter is the title for the page, and the third one is the URL. And it's the same properties for both replace and push. Push, just like any array method, push adds it to the history array. So you call push 5 times in a row, you're adding 5 entries to that array. You call replace state, you're just replacing the current one over and over again every time you call this. Alright, now let's say we're building a website, mobile web app, some sort of web functionality, and we want to control what the user's doing on this page. We have to consider that initial load. The user's clicked on a link somewhere, they've come to our page, and is there ever going to be data in that? Is there going to be data in the history state object? Or, more likely, is there going to be something in the hashtag? Now, back in the last episode, we talked about the various parts of the URL, the query string coming at the end after the file, and then at the very end is the hash value. So anytime the hashtag and then what's written after it, this is known as the hash value, anytime that changes, there's actually an event called hash change. This will fire as long as it's not just you going in and typing something in the URL. When we call push state and replace state, we're adding to the history array or replacing something in the history array. If we do this, we're not just adding to that history array, but we're also changing what's written inside the location bar. So let's just do a quick example of this. We'll say history.pushState, and we'll say that there's nothing going to be for the data, my title, and I'm going to make up a file name here that does not exist. Okay, so I'm adding this to the history array, but it's also going to change what's written in the location bar. On the page here, you can see history.html. This is the page. When I refresh, it's going to run the DOM content loaded script, and this is going to change to pretend.html. I'm still going to be on the history.html page, but it changes the URL. That has now been added to the history array, and it changes what's written here. But it's not triggering the pop state event, which was our other event right here. We have hash change and pop state. Hash change is when there is an actual change to the hash value written at the end. Pop state is when the URL changes. Any or all parts of the URL change. But neither the hash change nor pop state fire when we call replace state or push state. If it did, you'd just get this circular loop that was constantly calling itself. We don't want that to happen. So we've changed something here. I'm going to go back to history.html. There we are. It jumped to pretend. I got to comment that line out so it doesn't do that. There we are. So history, and if I come here and I add something, this doesn't actually fire my hash change event. My hash change event is changing the hash value, but it's changing it when the person clicks on a link, or you're calling the history back or go method, or the history assign or replace method. The person clicks the back button or the forward button in the browser. So these buttons right here, clicking on these will trigger the pop state and or the hash change. If I click an anchor tag here, that changed from what I had written here. If I click on navigate, you can see that changes. That would have triggered both the pop state and the hash change events. So let's see these happening. All right, we want to add the listeners for those. So window, add event listener. Now, it's great to talk about these things, but until you actually see them happening, sometimes it's hard to actually conceptualize what's going to happen. All right, hash change and pop state. There we are. Now I have to create these two functions. So one called HC for the hash change, and one called PS for pop state. The event object we're going to say is passed in. Now when you call hash change, there are actually two properties that you can get, which you don't get normally if you're doing a click event or a mouse over event, something like that, or a keyboard event. With the hash change, you get a property called new URL, and there's another one called old URL. So it tells you where you were and where you are now. Pop state, for that, we're going to be accessing the history.state, or we can get the state from the event itself, so the pop state change. This is the new history.state value. Now we should put notices about these things happening. So we want to write out pop state and hash change so we can see that they actually are happening. So we've added listeners. They're there. Okay, we refresh this. I will load the page. Okay, when I click navigate, there we go. Pop state and hash change. Both were called when I clicked on this link. Click it again, click it again, click it again. Now notice this time I'm only getting the pop state event. That is because each time I click on navigate, I've got this hashed value here from link. So that's never changing. And if the hash value is not changing, the hash change event is never going to fire. But I do get the pop state because I'm actually clicking on a link. It's like if I clicked on here, I'm actually navigating somewhere. When I clicked on here, I got both the hash change and the pop state firing because I have clicked a link, I am navigating someplace new. This is being changed not by the push state, but by actually clicking on a link. So there's pop states being fired 3 times, but not hash change. If we click the arrow back to go back to the history page, we get both. So hopefully that's clear. Pop state, hash change, both have to do with navigation. Pop state is when the whole thing gets changed. Hash change is when just that little bit at the end, the hash mark and whatever the value comes after it, when it changes. Okay, so we have hash change, pop state, those things are handled. Now, When building this system that's going to be used as a single page application or whatever, I have a choice to make. I can either have buttons or links on my page, and I can add click listeners onto every one of those. So let's say I go in here and I say document, get element by ID, btn for the button, or it could be link, because those are my IDs over here. Add event listener, and I can listen for the click event. And let's say I create a function called C. All right, now I can create this kind of functionality where I'm listening for every click. Refresh my page. Let's check if it looks like there's an error in the console. Yes, line 24, what did I do? Oh yeah, we should give a name to the function, not put that inside the parentheses. All right. Everyone makes mistakes. It's the way you learn. Okay, click on the link, and sure enough, clicked and pop state fired. The hash change didn't because it's the same one over and over again. Now I have a choice. I can listen for these changes. I can let the user click the back button. When the person clicks the back button, I can use pop state or hash change to listen. If I am using hash values to determine what is the current action, what am I doing on this page? Am I saving a user? Am I displaying a list? Am I updating some content? We can do that by, if we created a whole series of links within our site, and every one of them has a different hash value, then we can use the hash change event to track what we're doing. So we have hash change event, which is calling this function right here. And that's great. Nothing wrong with doing that. That is one approach. We can use the hash values, have a hash change event, have a pop state event, listen for that, call this function, the function listener, or the event listener rather, calls this function. We can use these to extract. What is the state? What is the URL? What is the history.state? I can get it from inside of here as well. I can get the history.search, which is the query string. We can get the history.hash, or sorry, location.hash. Location.hash, location.search, the query string, the hash value. So we can get those from inside of here. We know that a hash change has happened, and then we can grab the value to find out, all right, what has happened. The other alternative to doing that is to intercept all those clicks, to put something inside each one of these. So if I had just a word or something like that, list.html, add.html, edit.html, if I'm doing this, actually I'm not going to do it inside of this one because this one doesn't have the listener on it. Let's just put it back and go into here. If I'm using actual page references, these pages don't have to exist, mind you. I'm just writing something that looks like an actual URL that's pointing to a page, not just a different hash. If we use this, then the clicks is where we have to intercept this, because if I come in here, if I refresh this, when I click on this link, you can see down in the bottom here, when I mouse over, it's pointing to list.html. So if I click this, it's going to a page that does not exist. I can't allow that. So I have to intercept that click. What I have to do is, inside the click, I have to ev prevent default. This is the method that we use on the event for the click to prevent forms from submitting or to prevent anchors from actually navigating somewhere. Now, if I do that, great, I've stopped it. It's not actually going to leave, which may be what we're looking for. I'm stopping the browser from actually loading this other page that doesn't exist. I can then say, all right, you know what? Inside that anchor, so current target, that is my anchor tag, and I can ask for the href value. We can save it like that. And I'll just write it out to show you. So we're stopping the browser from going anywhere. We're going to right click, and then we're going to write out what the href is for this anchor tag. Refresh. It says history.html from link. When I click here, it's wanting to go to list.html, but we're preventing default, which means we're stopping it. This is the URL that it thinks it's going to go to. We could grab the last part of that list.html. So I can take this, I can split it up, I can call the string split method and grab whatever comes after that last /, get me the last little piece of it, remove the .html, and, or maybe I don't even have the HTML, I just do this. It's just an action name. There, list. It's just a word. So if I grab what comes after that last / here, if we do that, we can take that value and pass it to another function and say, okay, when you see the word list, this is what you're supposed to do. Make an AJAX call to the server and go and get the list of data that we need to display. Change what the navigation looks like on the page. So use CSS to make it look like the person's navigating. They're not actually leaving the page. You're actually keeping them on this same page through the entire application because you're preventing default on the link clicks. So these are the two different approaches with the history. We can let the user actually click on things, handle hash change and pop state for the full URL, hash change for the hash part of the URL. We can use push state and replace state to change what's written inside the location bar. And you know what? Actually, we take this. This would be a good place to do that. Like that. So we're going to right out click, prevent the link from actually going anywhere, grab where the anchor wanted to send us, and I'm going to write that in the location bar. There. It looks like I've gone to it. It's in my history, but I haven't actually gone anywhere. All I've done is I've made it look like I've gone somewhere. So let the links take you somewhere and use these events to track what's going on, or use the anchor tags and what information you're putting inside of here. And it doesn't just have to be the href. You can come up with your own data properties. So data.person equals 456. There we go. You can create properties. Part of HTML5 said that this is now legal to do. Come up with your own attributes. As long as they start with data and a hyphen, you can have your own attributes. Now I can use this as an extra piece of information. Maybe I'm going to save this inside of here as part of the history state object. I'm going to grab the person number and I'm going to save it inside here so that when I go to my next function, let's say I've got a function called load person. That load person is going to look at the value of history.state. Well, here. We'll pretend to do this. So function load person, and then inside of here, so person ID is going to be ev current target dot, well, several ways we can do it, but we'll do it this way. Get attribute, and it's data dash person. there's another way we can do this, which is data list dot person, but I prefer writing it out this way. And we're going to take that PID value and put it right there. I'll change this to PID instead of ABC. So we've just pushed this onto the history array, or I'll do this. I'll replace the current entry with this. Now I'm going to grab history.state, which should give me this object. Okay, now this is something that can happen sometimes when you're dealing with properties like history.state. Sometimes you need to be able to convert something into a string and then back into JSON so that it is properly read as an object. Now, this one is not wanting to come through here, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my history state and I'm going to call JSON.stringify on this. So I'm turning the history state, this right here, I'm turning this into a string. Then I'm going to take that HS and I'm going to parse it. JSON.parse, and we'll say, oops, like this. So we're taking the history state object, we're stringifying it, and then we're turning it back into an object, an actual JSON object. Now I should be able to write out the individual properties. So data will have a property called PID, and if I can write it out in the console and also on the screen like that. So here we go. Oh, sorry, list again. Go back to history, refresh it, refresh again to make sure we've got the latest version of the script. Click navigate, and there it is. There's the 456 being passed through. Okay. So the data person property with the value 456, we are grabbing that. When the person clicks on the link, we're getting the data person attribute, saving the value, and then we're putting it inside of the state when we call replace state. This changes what's written in the location bar. It replaces the current entry in the history array. Then we call this one, write out a message to say that we've called this function, and we take the history state object, stringify it, parse it to turn it back into an object that we can read, writing it out in the console and on the screen just so we can see that it does actually work. Okay, so a lot of things covered in this video. Hopefully this gives you a better insight into how you can use the history API, the push state, replace state methods, the on-click listeners, the hash change and the pop state listeners, the click listeners for the anchors, and then it's really all about making a decision. Which way do you want to go? Do you want to use hash values inside the anchor tags so you don't navigate, or do you want to use real words and do the navigation but kind of fudge it so you're preventing the actual navigation and then just grabbing the values out of the hrefs and faking your own navigation? And the last thing I want to mention is, whichever way you choose, make sure that you're setting up a script to run at the very beginning to check and see, is there anything in the history state? Is there anything in the hash value, depending on which one you're using, so that you can set up an initial state. When the page first loads, you want to call replace state and replace whatever the current entry is with the one that you want. Set some initial starting value that you are aware of and that you know how you want to handle in your code. All right, thanks for watching as always, and if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments.